Now, there are certain moments in galactic history that make you wonder if the universe has a sense of humor, or perhaps just enjoys watching civilizations learn things the hard way. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. The annual Galactic Council Companion Species Exhibition was supposed to be one of those delightfully boring diplomatic events where everyone shows off their adorable domesticated creatures, exchanges pleasantries about interspecies harmony, and goes home feeling warm and fuzzy about the peaceful nature of civilized society. Key word being supposed to. The exhibition hall stretched across 3 city blocks on the neutral station of Concordia Prime, its crystalline walls designed to filter sunlight into soothing pastels that wouldn't offend any species' visual sensibilities. Floating platforms hovered at various heights to accommodate delegates with different gravitational preferences, while the air itself was maintained at the perfect blend of atmospheric compositions that wouldn't kill anyone. Well, anyone who belonged there. For the past 238 cycles, this event had been the epitome of predictable wholesomeness. Species would arrive with their perfectly evolved companion animals, creatures so benign they made marshmallows look dangerous. The Velthari brought their singing moss that composed personalized lullabies. The Quantum Collective presented their probability cats that existed in multiple states of cute simultaneously. The hegemony of gentle worlds showcased plants that literally grew into furniture while purring contentedly. It was enough to make you diabetic just thinking about it. But this cycle, something was different. This cycle, the newly admitted species called humans had requested permission to participate. And if there's one thing the galaxy should have learned by now, it's that when humans show up to anything, you should probably start evacuating the gift shop. Commander Juniper stood at the edge of the exhibition platform, watching the other delegates fawn over a collection of what could only be described as living nightlights that never needed feeding and occasionally granted small wishes. She was a compact woman, with the kind of eyes that suggested she'd seen things that would make most beings' tentacles curl, and the relaxed posture of someone who'd learned to find humor in situations that would send others screaming into therapy. Fascinating, she murmured to herself, watching a Blix-10 delegate stroke what appeared to be a floating soap bubble that hummed contentedly and occasionally produced the scent of vanilla cookies. They've managed to evolve companions that are basically organic anxiety medication with wings. The Blix-10 delegate, a creature that resembled a cross between a butterfly and a philosophical debate, overheard her comment and drifted closer on gossamer wings that sparkled with what might have been stardust or very expensive glitter. "Indeed, honored human representative," Blix-10 chirped, in the universal translator's cheerful approximation of their native harmonics. "Our serenity spheres have been bred for over 10,000 cycles to provide maximum emotional comfort with zero maintenance requirements. They feed on ambient stress and convert it to peaceful energy. Would you like to experience their calming influence?" Juniper smiled with the particular brand of politeness that humans reserved for moments when they're about to shatter someone's entire worldview. "Oh, that's very kind of you. Perhaps later, after my presentation." Across the exhibition space, she could see other delegates proudly displaying their companions. The Lumith ambassador had arranged a small forest of crystalline organisms that grew into perfectly shaped chairs, tables, and what appeared to be a very aesthetically pleasing spittoon. Each crystal creature sang in harmony with the others, creating a melody that was scientifically designed to reduce blood pressure and promote feelings of universal love. Near the center of the hall, a delegation from the Peaceful Meadow Consortium had brought what they called harmony hamsters, creatures that looked like tiny, rainbow-colored bears, and apparently spent their entire lives doing nothing but group hugs and solving interpersonal conflicts through interpretive dance. The Galactic Safety Inspector, a bureaucratically minded being named Mothwell, who resembled a very nervous filing cabinet with eyes, was making rounds with a clipboard that probably contained more safety regulations than most species had laws. Mothwell had been doing this job for 3 decades and took pride in the fact that the most dangerous incident in the exhibition's history had been a paper cut from an overly enthusiastic origami pet. The regulations clearly state, Mothwell was explaining to a delegate whose companion appeared to be a sentient cloud of cotton candy that granted minor wishes and occasionally rained sprinkles, that all companion species must pose no greater threat level than a particularly stern lecture or a mildly disappointing birthday present. Juniper checked her chronometer and noted that her presentation slot was approaching. Behind her, arranged in a neat row, sat 5 transport containers that had been the subject of considerable speculation among the other delegates. The containers were regulation-compliant, properly sealed, and bore all the appropriate biohazard markings, which, admittedly, might have been the first red flag for anyone paying attention. But the galaxy had grown comfortable in its bubble of safety. When every species brings companions that could double as therapy animals or living furniture, you stop expecting anything more dangerous than aggressive cuddling. A chime rang through the exhibition hall, its tone perfectly calculated to get attention without startling anyone's nervous system. The ceremonial announcer, a holographic projection designed to be as inoffensive as possible, flickered to "Life above the central platform. Honored delegates, we now welcome Commander Juniper of the human delegation to present Earth's companion species for evaluation and potential inclusion in the Galactic Registry of Approved Domestic Organisms." The assembled delegates turned their attention toward the human representative with the kind of polite interest usually reserved for watching someone's vacation slides. A few whispered among themselves about humanity's recent admission to the Council, noting with approval that the humans had seemed remarkably well behaved during the initial diplomatic meetings. Juniper stepped onto the central platform, her movement causing a few delegates to shift nervously. Not because she seemed threatening, but because humans had this unsettling habit of moving like they were constantly ready for something to go wrong. It was probably nothing, they assured themselves. After all, what could possibly be dangerous about Earth's companion animals? The transport containers hummed quietly behind her as she activated the presentation system. Above the platform, a holographic display began showing images of Earth, a blue and green world that looked deceptively peaceful from space. "Esteemed colleagues," Juniper began, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd given this speech before, but never quite like this. "I'm honored to represent Earth in this celebration of interspecies companionship. Our world has developed a unique relationship with our animal companions, one that I believe demonstrates the profound bonds that can exist between different forms of life." Mothwell leaned forward slightly, stylus poised over the inspection clipboard. The preliminary reports from Earth had been interesting. Something about humans having an unusually high tolerance for what other species might consider challenging companion behavior. "Now, I should mention," Juniper continued, with the kind of casual tone that should have had everyone reaching for the emergency exits, "that Earth's approach to companion-animal relationships might seem a bit different from what you're accustomed to. We tend to appreciate animals that bring a certain authenticity to the relationship." The Blixten delegate's serenity sphere pulsed with what might have been curiosity, or possibly a stress-induced migraine. "Before we begin," Juniper said, resting her hand on the first transport container, "I'd like to establish some context about how companionship evolved on our world. You see, Earth is what we might diplomatically call a competitive ecosystem. Our companion animals weren't selected for their ability to provide comfort or perform useful services, but rather for their capacity to form genuine partnerships with another species that shares their, let's call it, vigorous approach to survival." A few delegates exchanged glances. Vigorous approach to survival wasn't typically the kind of phrase you heard at companion animal exhibitions. It sounded almost like military jargon. Mothwell's stylus hovered uncertainly over the clipboard. The regulations didn't actually specify what to do if a presentation began with what sounded suspiciously like a threat assessment. "Our first companion," Juniper announced, her hand moving to the release mechanism of the first container, "represents thousands of cycles of co-evolution between humans and what we consider to be the perfect domestic partner. May I present our feline companions?" The container hissed open with the kind of sound that suggested pressurized containment systems and very serious security protocols. What emerged was, actually, it was quite small and fluffy, with large eyes and a pink nose that twitched curiously at its new surroundings. The assembled delegates collectively exhaled in relief. It was adorable, tiny, harmless, exactly what they'd been expecting from a species that seemed to be making such a big deal about authenticity and competitive ecosystems. Muffin, because of course the humans had given their companion an endearing name, sat primly on the platform and began what appeared to be a grooming ritual, one tiny paw licking the other in a display that made several delegates emit sounds of appreciation. "Oh, how delightful," Blixten chirped. "It appears to be self-maintaining and aesthetically pleasing. Does it provide emotional comfort through harmonic purring?" Juniper's smile took on a quality that somehow managed to be both warm and terrifying. "Well, funny you should mention that." As if responding to some pre-arranged cue, Muffin's head snapped toward the Blixten's floating serenity sphere, with the kind of focus that should have triggered every evolutionary warning system in the room. His pupils dilated to perfect black circles, his body dropped into a crouch that was all flowing muscle and barely contained violence, and his tail began to twitch, with the mechanical precision of a targeting system acquiring a lock. The serenity sphere, apparently sensing that its entire existence had just been reclassified from ambient environmental feature to prey item, began emitting what could only be described as a stress-flavored vanilla scream. "Muffin," Juniper said calmly, "demonstrates the remarkable hunting instincts that made his ancestors such successful partners for early human civilization. Felines are what we call obligate carnivores, meaning they're biologically designed to kill and consume other living creatures for survival." The exhibition hall had gone very, very quiet. "Kill?" Mothwell's voice came out as something between a whisper and a strangled wheeze. "Oh, yes," Juniper continued cheerfully, as Muffin began stalking the now panicking serenity sphere with the focused intensity of a missile guidance system. "Cats are actually one of our more restrained companions. They typically only kill for food, territorial disputes, entertainment, or because they're bored. Very reasonable creatures, really." The silence that followed Juniper's casual mention of entertainment killing could have been bottled and sold as a sedative. Across the exhibition hall, delegates who had been cooing over rainbow hamsters and singing moss were now staring at the small, fluffy creature on the platform with the kind of expression usually reserved for unexploded ordnance. Muffin, blissfully unaware that he'd just become the galaxy's first documented case of cute but concerning, had abandoned his pursuit of the Serenity Sphere in favor of something far more interesting: his own tail. He spun in tight circles, attacking the offending appendage with the dedication of a seasoned warrior engaging a particularly elusive enemy. "Entertainment," Mothwell repeated slowly, stylus frozen halfway to the clipboard. "Your companion kills for entertainment." "Well, not exclusively," Juniper replied, with the helpful tone of someone clarifying a minor misunderstanding, rather than explaining predatory behavior to a room full of beings whose idea of aggression was passive-aggressive furniture arrangement. "Sometimes they bring us the bodies as gifts." It's really quite thoughtful. The Lumeth ambassador's crystalline organisms had stopped singing in harmony and were now producing what sounded suspiciously like a funeral dirge. One of the chair creatures had actually grown into what appeared to be a defensive barricade. "Perhaps," Blixten ventured, their gossamer wings fluttering with barely controlled panic, "we should move on to your next companion? Something more traditional?" Juniper's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone about to share their favorite hobby with new friends. "Oh, you're going to love this one. Our canine companions represent one of humanity's greatest achievements in interspecies cooperation." The second transport container was noticeably larger than the first, and when it opened, what emerged made Muffin look like a particularly harmless stuffed toy. Boulder was what humans generously called a medium-sized dog, though by galactic standards he qualified as a mobile natural disaster with fur and an enthusiastic attitude toward life. Boulder bounded onto the platform with the kind of energy that suggested he'd been storing up excitement for this moment his entire life. He was mostly golden retriever, with what appeared to be some additional genetic contributions from creatures that evolution had designed specifically for enthusiastic face-licking and the protection of territory through aggressive friendliness. "Magnificent, isn't he?" Juniper said proudly, scratching behind Boulder's ears as his tail created small windstorms with its wagging. "Canines have been humanity's partners for over 15,000 cycles. They're incredibly loyal, intelligent, and protective." "Protective," Mothwell echoed, scribbling notes with increasing desperation. "Protective of what, exactly?" "Oh, everything they consider part of their pack," Juniper replied cheerfully. "Their humans, their territory, their food, their favorite sleeping spots, that one specific stick they found last week." As if summoned by the discussion of protection, Boulder's attention suddenly focused on the Lumeth ambassador's crystalline spittoon, which had been innocently sitting in its designated display area, probably contemplating the peaceful nature of existence and, perhaps, composing a small song about mineral formations. Boulder's expression shifted from friendly neighborhood dog to DEFCON 1 threat assessment in approximately 0.3 seconds. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not the warning growl of an animal establishing boundaries, but the sound a mountain might make right before it decides to relocate itself onto something smaller and more fragile. "Boulder." "No," Juniper said, with the weary authority of someone who'd had this conversation before. "The crystalline organism is not threatening our pack. It's just sitting there being decorative." Boulder tilted his head, considering this information with the kind of thoughtful expression that suggested he was weighing the merits of immediate action versus waiting to see if the spittoon made any suspicious moves. "He's quite large," the Lumeth ambassador observed, their voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard not to be noticed by something with that many teeth. "Boulder's actually on the smaller end of his breed," Juniper explained helpfully. We also have canines that weigh twice as much and were originally bred for hunting large predators. Boulder here was bred for retrieving waterfowl that had been shot down by human hunters. Shot down, Blixton repeated faintly. Yes, we'd kill birds at a distance, and Boulder's ancestors would swim out into dangerous waters to bring back the bodies. Remarkable partnership, really. Humans provide the long-range elimination capabilities. Canines handle the retrieval and tracking. Mothwell's stylus had begun smoking from the friction of rapid note-taking. Your companion species are military contractors? Oh, no, Juniper laughed, and somehow that laugh was more unsettling than Boulder's growling. These are our domestic pets. Our military working animals are significantly more specialized. The exhibition hall had developed the kind of atmosphere usually found in the moments before someone suggests that maybe everyone should consider evacuating to a safe distance. The Harmony hamsters had stopped doing interpretive dance and were now huddled together in what appeared to be a defensive formation, their rainbow fur dulled to more practical camouflage colors. Perhaps, Mothwell suggested, with the careful tone of someone trying not to poke a sleeping predator, we could discuss the selection criteria for Earth's companion animals. What qualities do humans value in their domestic partners? Juniper brightened, clearly delighted to discuss her favorite topic. Well, loyalty is essential. We need to know our companions will stand with us against any threat. Intelligence is crucial. They need to make independent decisions in dangerous situations. Physical capability is important, because a companion that can't keep up in a crisis isn't much of a partner. She paused, scratching Muffin behind the ears, while Boulder continued his suspicious surveillance of the crystalline spittoon. But most importantly, she continued, we value authenticity. We want companions who are genuinely themselves, predators who choose to be partners rather than creatures who've been bred into helpless dependency. Predators, the Lumith ambassador said quietly, as if testing the word to see if it might explode. Well, yes. Earth is what you might call a robust ecosystem. Everything that survived long enough to become a companion species had to be capable of violence when necessary. We didn't domesticate sheep or prey animals. We domesticated the things that hunt sheep and prey animals. Across the hall, a delegate from the Gentle Worlds Confederation was quietly packing up their display of living nightlights, several of which appeared to be having what might charitably be called nervous breakdowns. Now, I should probably mention, Juniper continued, with the casual tone of someone about to drop another conversational bomb, that both felines and canines are what we call pack predators, or social hunters. They're genetically programmed to coordinate attacks with other members of their species. Coordinate attacks, Mothwell whispered, stylus now trailing smoke as it raced across the clipboard. Muffin there might look like he's playing with that string toy, but what he's actually doing is practicing the precise paw movements he'd use to disembowel a rabbit. And Boulder's retrieval instincts? Those are modified hunting behaviors. He's been bred to work with humans as a team to track, corner, and eliminate targets. The Serenity Sphere, which had been hiding behind Blixten's wing, let out what could only be described as a whimper of existential dread. But they're so... Blixten gestured helplessly at Muffin, who had discovered his own reflection in the polished floor and was now engaged in a staring contest with himself. They're so small and fluffy. Oh, that's the beautiful part, Juniper said with genuine warmth. They choose to be gentle with us. Every day, Muffin could decide to use those claws and teeth on a human instead of a toy mouse. Every day, Boulder could choose to see us as threats, to eliminate rather than pack members to protect. But they don't. She looked around the hall at the assembled delegates, most of whom appeared to be reconsidering their life choices. That's what makes them true companions. They're not helpless creatures dependent on our care. They're partners who could survive perfectly well without us, but choose not to. They're predators who've decided we're worth cooperating with instead of eating. Instead of eating, Mothwell repeated, and there was definitely a hysterical edge creeping into the safety inspector's voice. Well, mostly, Juniper added helpfully. There are occasional incidents, but usually only when humans forget to maintain proper pack dynamics or fail to provide adequate enrichment activities. The exhibition hall had reached that special level of quiet that occurs when everyone is trying very hard to think calming thoughts, while simultaneously calculating the distance to the nearest exit. The Harmony hamsters had given up on rainbow colors entirely, and were now a nervous shade of brown that suggested they were considering burrowing underground until the scary, predator-loving humans went away. Juniper checked her chronometer and smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose presentation was going exactly according to plan. "Now then," she said, moving toward the third transport container, "shall we continue? I think you're really going to find our next companion fascinating." From inside the third container came a sound that could generously be described as rustling, if you were the sort of person who described avalanches as minor geological adjustments. The third transport container was different from the first two. Where Muffin and Boulder's containers had hummed with life support systems, this one was completely silent. Not the peaceful silence of something sleeping, but the predatory stillness of something waiting. The kind of silence that made prey animals across the galaxy develop nervous twitches in their genetic memory. "Before we proceed," Juniper announced with the cheerful demeanor of someone about to demonstrate a particularly exciting science experiment, "I should mention that our next companion represents a slightly different category of human-animal relationship. While Muffin and Boulder are what we call traditional domestic partners, Ribbon here falls into the category we affectionately term managed coexistence." Managed coexistence? Blixten's voice had developed a tremor that their gossamer wings translated into visible vibrations. "Oh, yes. Some of Earth's most fascinating companions aren't technically domesticated so much as diplomatically neutral. They've agreed not to kill us, and in exchange, we provide them with optimal living conditions and regular meals." The container's release mechanism engaged with a soft hiss, and what emerged redefined the assembly's understanding of the phrase nightmare fuel. Ribbon was beautiful in the way that natural disasters are beautiful, an undeniable aesthetic perfection that your brain appreciated right up until it remembered that you were supposed to be running away screaming. She was roughly the length of Juniper's arm, with scales that shifted between deep emerald and gold, depending on how the light caught them. Her movement was pure liquid grace, each muscle flowing seamlessly into the next as she glided onto the platform. But it was her head that really drove the point home. Triangle-shaped, with eyes that seemed to catalog every living thing in the room for future reference, and a tongue that flicked out to taste the air with the casual efficiency of someone checking the wine before dinner. "Magnificent, isn't she?" Juniper said proudly, extending her hand toward Ribbon, who immediately wound herself around Juniper's arm with the fluid precision of a living bracelet. "Ball pythons are constrictors. They kill by wrapping around their prey and applying pressure until the target stops breathing." The exhibition hall had gone beyond quiet into a realm that physicists might describe as negative sound, a silence so profound It seemed to absorb noise from neighboring star systems. Stops. Breathing. Mothwell managed to whisper, stylus now producing actual flames. It's quite efficient, really. No messy blood, no unnecessary violence, just a gentle squeeze until the prey item becomes a meal. Very civilized approach to predation. Ribbon raised her head, fixing her ancient gaze on the assembled delegates with the kind of look that suggested she was mentally calculating weight-to-coil ratios. Her tongue flicked out again, tasting the variety of alien pheromones that were now flooding the air with what could diplomatically be called stress indicators. Now, I know what you're thinking, Juniper continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that half the delegates were edging toward the exits, while the other half appeared to be entering some form of catatonic shock. Why would humans choose to share living space with a creature specifically designed to kill mammals of roughly human size? Yes, Blixten squeaked, their serenity sphere now producing an aroma that smelled distinctly like fear-flavored vanilla, with notes of impending doom. Why would you do that? Because, Juniper said, with the warm smile of someone sharing a cherished family memory, Ribbon represents the ultimate expression of trust between species. Every day, she chooses not to kill us. And every day, we choose to respect her nature rather than trying to change what she fundamentally is. Across the hall, the delegate from the Peaceful Meadow Consortium had abandoned all pretense of diplomatic composure and was now openly weeping while their harmony hamsters attempted to comfort them through interpretive dance that looked suspiciously like funeral rites. But surely, the Lumeth ambassador ventured, their voice carrying the desperate hope of someone clinging to the last threads of sanity. This is the most extreme example? Surely your other companions are more conventional? Juniper's expression took on the particular quality of someone who was about to disappoint a room full of people very, very badly. Well, actually, we have several categories of companion animals that are more dangerous than constrictors. There are venomous species, for instance. Venomous? Mothwell repeated, the word coming out like a death rattle. Oh yes, some humans keep cobras, vipers, various species of venomous lizards. We have enthusiasts who maintain relationships with creatures that could kill a human in under 10 minutes with a single bite. The Serenity Sphere made a sound that the universal translator struggled to process, but which roughly approximated the existential scream of matter being converted directly to energy. The fascinating thing about venomous companions, Juniper continued with the academic enthusiasm of someone discussing their doctoral thesis, is that they've developed chemical weapon systems over millions of cycles of evolution. They're basically living laboratories of biological warfare, and some humans invite them into their homes and feed them mice. Why? Blixten's question came out as more of a wail than actual communication. Because they're beautiful. They're perfectly adapted to their ecological niche, and they represent a form of power that demands respect rather than fear. A venomous snake doesn't waste energy on threats or posturing. It simply exists as a reminder that nature is not something to be conquered, but something to be understood and appreciated. Ribbon, as if responding to the discussion, began exploring the platform with renewed interest, her tongue flicking toward the various alien delegates with what might have been curiosity or possibly menu planning. Now, you might be wondering about our selection process, Juniper said, gently guiding Ribbon away from a particularly fragrant Lumeth crystal that had begun emitting what sounded like prayers in several extinct languages. How does a species decide to domesticate creatures that could easily kill them? The assembled delegates leaned forward despite themselves, caught between terror and the kind of morbid fascination that makes beings slow down to look at accident scenes? The answer is quite simple, really. Humans didn't domesticate animals in spite of their dangerous nature. We domesticated them because of it. Because of it, Mothwell echoed, stylus now completely ablaze, but continuing to take notes through sheer bureaucratic determination. You see, Earth is what biologists call a competitive ecosystem. Every successful species had to develop either superior predatory capabilities or superior evasive capabilities. The creatures that humans chose as companions were invariably the ones with superior predatory capabilities. Juniper's hand moved to the fourth transport container, and the rustling sound from within suggested something that was significantly larger than a python and considerably more energetic. Which brings us to our final companion for this portion of the presentation. I'd like you to meet Storm. The fourth container didn't open so much as explode outward, as Storm launched herself into the exhibition space with the kind of entrance that suggested she'd been waiting her entire life for exactly this moment. She was a red-tailed hawk, all wings and talons and predatory focus, and she filled the air above the platform with the kind of presence that made every delegate simultaneously remember that their ancestors had spent considerable evolutionary energy learning to fear things that attacked from above. Storm landed on Juniper's extended arm with the casual precision of a guided missile finding its target, her talons gripping the protective gauntlet that Juniper wore with enough pressure to punch through most known armor materials. Her head turned in mechanical sweeps, those raptor eyes cataloging every movement in the hall with the efficiency of a military targeting system. Storm represents our avian companions, Juniper explained, apparently untroubled by the fact that she now had a living weapon perched inches from her face. Raptors are aerial hunters with visual acuity that makes them capable of spotting prey from distances that would be impressive to most starship sensors. Several delegates were now making sounds that the universal translator was interpreting as prayers, though it was unclear which deities they were addressing and whether they were asking for salvation or simply a quicker death. Those talons are designed to punch through bone and deliver crushing pressure to vital organs, Juniper continued with the helpful tone of a nature documentary narrator. And that beak? It's specifically shaped for tearing flesh from prey that's often still alive when consumption begins. Storm chose that moment to demonstrate her hunting call, a piercing shriek that seemed to bypass the auditory system entirely and communicate directly with the fear centers of every brain in the room. It was the sound that small mammals heard in the split second before becoming part of the food chain, compressed into pure auditory terror, and delivered at maximum volume. The effect was immediate and comprehensive. The Blix-10 delegates' serenity sphere imploded with what sounded like a vanilla-scented sob. Half the Harmony hamsters fainted outright, while the other half began what appeared to be a traditional death dance. The Lumeth ambassador's crystalline organism switched from funeral dirge to what could only be described as a mineral-based panic attack, their harmonic resonance cracking several decorative panels in the exhibition hall. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Juniper said fondly, offering Storm a small piece of what looked suspiciously like raw meat from a pouch at her belt. Hawks have been human partners for thousands of cycles. We call it falconry, the art of hunting in cooperation with aerial predators. Cooperation? Mothwell managed to wheeze, clipboard now completely consumed by flame, but somehow still functional through bureaucratic stubbornness alone. Oh yes, the human provides transportation to hunting grounds and locates prey, while the hawk handles the actual killing. It's a perfect partnership. Human intelligence and hawk lethality working together to dominate the local ecosystem. Storm mantled her wings, displaying the full span of her aerial superiority, and several more delegates decided that urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy required their immediate attention. "Now then," Juniper said, with the satisfaction of someone whose presentation had exceeded all expectations, "shall we discuss the philosophical implications of human-predator partnerships and what they reveal about our species' approach to interspecies relations?" The philosophical implications, as it turned out, would have to wait. Because at that precise moment, Storm decided that the exhibition hall contained far too many interesting flying objects and not nearly enough respect for her position as apex aerial predator of the immediate vicinity. She launched herself from Juniper's arm with the explosive power of a feathered missile, wings spreading to their full impressive span as she began what could charitably be called a territorial survey, and what the panicking delegates were calling the end of civilized society as we know it. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The remaining Serenity spheres, apparently deciding that discretion was the better part of continued existence, began abandoning their posts and fleeing toward the nearest air recycling vents. The Harmony hamsters achieved a level of interpretive dance that transcended art and entered the realm of pure survival instinct. And somewhere in the chaos, a crystalline spittoon began playing what sounded distinctly like a swan song. "Storm, heel," Juniper called out, with the weary authority of someone who'd had this conversation in multiple star systems. Storm, to her credit, immediately returned to Juniper's arm, though not before executing a victory roll that suggested she'd thoroughly enjoyed her brief reign of terror over the exhibition hall. "Now then," Juniper continued, apparently unbothered by the fact that roughly half the Galactic Diplomatic Corps was now hiding behind overturned furniture, "I believe someone asked about the philosophical implications." Mothwell, whose clipboard had evolved beyond mere combustion into what appeared to be a small plasma fire, managed to nod shakily. "The thing you have to understand," Juniper began, her voice taking on the tone of someone about to deliver a lecture that would fundamentally alter her audience's understanding of the universe, "is that humans didn't domesticate these creatures in spite of their predatory nature. We domesticated them because we recognized something familiar in their approach to survival." She gestured to her companions. Muffin, who was now stalking a speck of dust with the focused intensity of a seasoned hunter, Boulder, who had appointed himself guardian of the immediate area and was conducting regular security patrols, Ribbon, who had found a patch of warm sunlight and was basking in it while somehow managing to look supremely dangerous, even in repose, and Storm, who was surveying her domain with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully established aerial superiority. "You see, Earth didn't produce gentle gardeners or peaceful philosophers as its dominant species," Juniper continued. "Earth produced persistence hunters, pack predators, tool-using killers who conquered their planet not through superior strength or speed, but through superior cooperation, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to give up." The exhibition hall had achieved a level of silence that suggested everyone was either listening with rapt attention or had entered some form of shock-induced coma. "Humans are predators," Juniper said simply, and somehow those 3 words carried more weight than all the technical specifications and safety warnings that had come before. "We're persistence hunters who used to chase prey animals across continents until they died of exhaustion. We're pack hunters who developed language specifically to coordinate more efficient killing strategies. We're tool-using predators who looked at every other species on our planet and asked ourselves, how can we make this dead?" Blix-10 made a sound that the universal translator interpreted as existential whimpering. "But here's the beautiful part," Juniper continued, her voice warming with genuine affection as she looked at her companions. When we achieved dominance over our ecosystem, we didn't choose to eliminate our competition. Instead, we looked at the other predators, the ones who were almost as smart as us, almost as adaptable, almost as dangerous, and we said, "You know what? Let's be friends." She reached down to scratch Muffin behind the ears, and the small cat began producing a sound that was somehow both a purr and a barely contained threat assessment of the surrounding environment. We didn't domesticate prey animals because we didn't need more prey. We domesticated predators because we needed equals, partners, companions who could match our own capacity for violence but chose not to use it against us. Mothwell's stylus had achieved some form of critical mass and was now producing what appeared to be a small nuclear reaction, but somehow the notes continued to appear on the clipboard through sheer bureaucratic momentum. "Every morning when I wake up," Juniper said, her voice taking on an almost reverent quality, "Muffin could choose to open my throat while I sleep. Boulder could decide that I'm a threat to be eliminated, rather than a pack member to be protected. Ribbon could wrap around my neck instead of my arm. And Storm could take out my eyes before I even knew she was hunting." The assembled delegates were now staring at the human representative, with the kind of expression usually reserved for watching someone juggle live grenades while riding a unicycle across a tightrope. "But they don't," Juniper continued. "Every single day, they make the choice to be partners instead of killers. Not because they're helpless without us, not because they're dependent on our care, but because they've decided we're worth cooperating with." She looked around the hall, taking in the faces of beings whose understanding of domestication had just been thoroughly demolished and rebuilt from the ground up. That's what makes them true companions. They're not pets in the sense that your species understand the concept. They're not cute accessories or living furniture or organic therapy devices. They're predators who have chosen to hunt alongside us instead of hunting us. Storm chose that moment to demonstrate her approval of this speech by releasing another of her hunting calls, though this one seemed less like a territorial challenge and more like a victory cry. "And that," Juniper said with the satisfaction of someone who had just delivered the perfect closing argument, "is why human pets don't come with safety warnings. Because the danger isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the fundamental basis of the relationship." The exhibition hall remained in stunned silence for several long moments. Then, slowly, Mothwell raised one trembling appendage. "Question," the safety inspector managed to croak. "Yes? Are all humans like this?" Juniper tilted her head thoughtfully. "Like what?" "Predators who make friends with other predators?" "Well," Juniper said with a smile that somehow managed to be both reassuring and absolutely terrifying, "we did take over our entire planet. And then we looked up at the stars and decided we wanted to make friends with you, too." The implications of that statement settled over the assembly like a blanket made of pure existential dread. 6 months later, the Galactic Council's annual Companion Species Exhibition had been quietly renamed to the Interspecies Partnership Appreciation Event and moved to a facility with significantly better emergency evacuation protocols. The Blix-10 delegation had requested permission to study human domestication techniques, apparently having decided that Serenity spheres weren't providing adequate emotional preparation for life in a galaxy that contained persistence hunters. The Lumeth ambassador had commissioned a series of crystalline organisms specifically designed to grow into panic rooms, and the Peaceful Meadow Consortium had begun what they diplomatically termed defensive capability enhancement research. But perhaps most tellingly, the waiting list for Earth-bred companion animals had grown to over 300 species, each one apparently having decided that if you were going to share the galaxy with apex predators, you might as well make friends with the ones who had already figured out how to make friendship profitable. Mothwell had been promoted to Chief of Galactic Safety Oversight and had instituted a new regulation requiring all species to provide detailed predatory capability assessments for their companion animals. The regulation was officially known as the Comprehensive Interspecies Domestic Partnership Safety Protocol, but everyone called it the Human Rule. And somewhere in the diplomatic quarters of Concordia Prime, Commander Juniper was preparing her next presentation. Earth's Working Animals. When humans need something more dangerous than pets. But the real change wasn't in the regulations, or the waiting lists, or even the panic rooms. The real change was in the way the galaxy looked at humanity itself. Because once you understand that a species chose to domesticate wolves instead of sheep, cobras instead of butterflies, hawks instead of songbirds, you begin to realize that maybe, just maybe, you've been fundamentally misunderstanding what kind of neighbors you'd invited into the galactic community. The humans hadn't lied during their admission interviews. They'd described themselves accurately as cooperative, social, and peaceful. They just hadn't mentioned that their version of cooperation involved forming hunting packs. Their idea of social interaction included predator bonding rituals, and their definition of peaceful was not currently eliminating the competition. It was, several xenobiologists noted in their hastily published papers, a perfect example of how translation could be technically accurate while being completely misleading. Yes, humans were peaceful, in the same way that a well-fed shark was peaceful. Yes, they were social, in the same way that wolves were social. And yes, they were cooperative, in the same way that a hunting party was cooperative. The Galactic Psychological Evaluation Board had quietly begun revising their assessment criteria after realizing that humans had passed their mental stability tests not despite their predatory nature, but because of their remarkable ability to redirect their hunting instincts toward productive goals like exploration, diplomacy, and interspecies friendship. As one senior evaluator had noted in a confidential memo, "We spent so much time making sure they weren't going to eat us that we forgot to ask why a species of apex predators wanted to join a peaceful galactic community in the first place. The answer, it turns out, is that they were looking for bigger game. The galaxy, as it turned out, was still learning what it meant to share space with a species that looked at evolution's most successful killers and thought, you know what? Let's be roommates. Some lessons, apparently, required more than one class.